The boy in the glass elevator didn't make a sound as the car stuttered and stopped between floors, but his fingers beat a tiny rhythm on the wheelchair armrest. Tap, 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 tap. That caught the cleaner's ear like a whispered name. Mara had been buffing the marble of the midnight lobby. Radio turned down to a hiss when the elevator hiccuped and froze. The skyscraper slept around her, security lights bleeding cool gold into the atrium, the indoor trees holding their breath, the fountain chewing water to itself. She looked up and saw him trapped inside the lamplit cube. A pale moon of a face above a navy sweater, the chair's wheels like curled commas. He tapped again. Tap, 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 tap. Morse. She didn't know Morse, but she knew eyes, it said, don't call anyone yet. Her mop handle pinged as she leaned it against the bucket. She pressed the X for emergency communication on the elevator panel. The speaker fizzed. Maintenance is en route, a tin voice said. Stay calm. The boy didn't look at the speaker. He looked at her. That cool, fierce directness children have before adults teach them to be polite. The door was glass. She could see the careful architecture of his bones. She lifted her hands. Okay, and he nodded once, brisk. The elevator was caught at a seam between floor 12 and 13, like a breath that couldn't make up its mind. His wheelchair brakes were on. Are you hurt? She mouthed. He shook his head. Do you want me to call your father? The words stumbled off her lips without meaning to. She'd seen the photographs, the headlines mounted on the lobby wall. Adrian Vale, philanthropist visionary. The eyes that made rooms fall quiet. His little boy in the corner of frame, always in that chair, always with a smile that looked pasted on by a publicist. The boy's hand flew up. No, Mara had seen panic attack faces before. This wasn't that. This was some other storm. She stepped closer to the glass and put her palm on it. He lifted his hand and matched hers, thin fingers to the reflection, skin to skin through a cold sheet. His breath fogged the panel. He looked like he was trying to memorize her. Okay, she said softly, aware of the security camera watching like a moon, aware of the echo of her voice. Okay, then we'll just breathe. Tap, 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 tap. The rhythm had a pattern that tugged at a place under her ribs she didn't visit often. Without deciding to, she started humming. It wasn't a song at first, just a shape of melody built by the clicks of her mop bucket wheels, by the tidy percussion of the fountain. 5 notes up, 3 down, repeat. The boy's eyes widened, he mouthed something. Again. She did, this time tucking the hum into syllables, a tune that had once lived in a place she didn't talk about. The notes loosened her hands, old muscle memory. She had scrubbed to this tempo in kitchens, rocked babies to it in quiet rooms with cracked blinds. She remembered a wristband with a barcode. She remembered certification forms. She shivered. Stop it. The elevator jolted. The boy's chair rattled. Maintenance, the speaker said. Hold, please. Hey, she said, because his mouth was tight now, eyes glittering with the narrow anger of a stranded cat. I'm Mara. I'm new here. I just started 2 weeks. I'm Theo, he said, through the glass, the voice more soundless shape than sound. I know the building, it's dumb. You can mouth insults at it. It won't care. A breath that might have been a laugh smudged the glass. The maintenance team finally pried open the elevator doors with a grunt and a bar that squealed against the track. The car had stopped a few inches below 13th. They raised it by hand and latched the door. Gonna be a second, one of them said, black braids swinging. We've got to level the car. I can, Mara started. Not sure with what. A handkerchief? Her presence, she didn't have authority here. But she had a mop and a spine. And the boy's knuckles were white on the wheels of his chair. When the doors slid fully open with a sigh, the maintenance woman braced the elevator and extended the ramp. Got you, she said to Theo, warm voice. Easy competence. Little bump, Theo rolled forward. One tiny rear wheel snagged on the lip, the chair listing at a nerve-jangling angle. Instinct moved faster than thought. Mara lunged, catching the headrest with both hands, anchoring the chair with the quick strength of someone who had held heavy things for a living. The chair thumped to level. Theo's breath left him, his hand shook. She was close enough to smell the faint sweetness of his shampoo. to see the pale constellation of a birthmark just behind his left ear, like someone had thumbprinted him with a dusty violet star. "Thanks," he said, barely there. His eyes tracked to her face again, like he was mapping it. "Sure," she whispered. The security doors whispered open. A man's footsteps came like punctuation toward them, hard, decisive. A familiar silhouette divided the light. Tall, composed, jacket folded over one arm as if it had never known wrinkles. Adrian Vale. He didn't look winded, but the tendons in his neck were taut. "Theo." His voice was quiet and lethal. "What happened?" "Elevator stuck," the maintenance woman said before anyone else could speak. "We had him. No harm, no nothing." Adrian's gaze flicked to Mara, cool and quick. "He didn't say thank you. He said, 'Why was my son in the elevator alone?'" Theo's mouth flattened. Mara looked at the boy and saw something flicker. Not fear, defiance, and something else that tugged at her throat. "Apology. I can answer for that," a new voice said. A nanny in neat beige, hair like a helmet, materialized as if conjured by guilt. "He said he wanted," she faltered, "to see the view." Adrian closed his eyes like someone had put a knife in his temple. "You know the rules. Elevator rides are cleared." His gaze returned to Theo. "I can't lose you," he said. "So soft you'd have to test it against your own heart to hear it was true." Theo flinched at the word lose. "Sir," Mara said. She wasn't sure why she said sir, but it felt like a ship she could board. Adrian's eyes slid to her again. This time he looked at her as if she had stepped into his shot. "He did great," he said, and her voice didn't shake, didn't panic, kept steady. We, she stopped, because this felt like trespass. Theo looked at her hand. She hadn't realized she was still half bracing the chair. She let go. Adrian's attention skated over that detail and filed it somewhere she couldn't see. "Thank you," he said finally, the words clipped and precise, like a contract signed with a slight frown. He tilted his head at his son. "We're going upstairs. There's a call with Tokyo. I'll be next door." They turned to leave. Theo's hand hesitated. "Wait," he said, and everyone stopped because he didn't use that particular tone often. Thin and iron. He looked at Mara. "What was that song?" She blinked. The maintenance woman smiled, because she recognized a boy buying himself a piece of control. "Just something my grandmother used to hum," Mara said. "Hum it again." The nanny stiffened. "The car is ready, Theo." "Hush," he said, eyes never leaving Mara's. He had the Vale family's command and none of its polish, so she hummed. The fountain whispered along. The marble sang the high notes back. The tower listened. And Theo, still, silent Theo, who had spent 2 years in a chair that might as well have been welded to gravity, did something no one in that circle expected. His left foot slid an imperfect inch forward on the elevator floor, shoes squeaking, calf shaking like it had woken from a long dream. The movement was fragile, a moth swing. Adrian's breath caught audibly. Then, before any of them could name it, measure it, own it, the boy's eyes filled, and he dragged the foot back like he'd been burned. "Stop," he said to her, to himself. She couldn't tell, don't say. He was trembling now. He gripped the wheels so hard the tendons in his hands stood out like cords. "Okay," Mara said, throat thick. "Okay." Adrian knelt in front of his son like a man kneeling before an altar. "Theo." There was a question in his voice like a prayer. The nanny looked like a statue about to crack. Theo shut his eyes and said very quietly, "Don't tell him." "Don't tell me what?" Adrian asked. And the elevator door began to close again behind them on an automatic timer. And in the thin slice of dimming light, Theo's eyes opened, met Mara's, and said without speaking, "Please, please." Mara stood there with a tune in her mouth she couldn't sing, a billionaire stare on her skin, and a tremor passing up her own leg like a nerve remembering fire. The door clicked. "Don't tell him," Theo whispered again, as the elevator sealed them in grey like a secret. And the last thing Mara saw before the doors kissed shut was the boy's knuckles smoothing, his foot twitching once more as if the music were a key in a lock. "Don't tell him." The syllables hung in her like bells after the cathedral emptied. The elevator whispered upwards, slicing the atrium moonlight into laces. Mara's hands felt too empty without the chair's weight. She returned to her mop as if it were a rosary. The fountain plucked its strings. The maintenance crew vanished into the night like competent ghosts. The lobby spotted ficus side. The world resumed its usual habit of not caring what you carried inside your ribs. She wrung the mop and cleaned the place where the elevator had kissed the marble. The heat had a memory there. "Excuse me." The word arrived with the hush of expensive shoes. Mara didn't look up right away. 5 more strokes. "Don't make them wipe over you." When she did lift her face, the nanny, in beige and apology, stood a step away, hands folded like she was praying for permission. "I shouldn't interrupt," the nanny said. "But what you sang." Her eyes were full of the weary, impersonal kindness of someone who lived on the edge of other people's lives. It calmed him. "I won't do it again," Mara said before she could stop herself if it upset him. "He frightens himself," the nanny admitted on a frown. "He thinks any movement will be used as—" She pulled her lips in. "Proof. Pressure. Pressure. Headlines." The Vale Foundation's press releases had spoken other words: rare neurological condition, atypical prognosis, resilient joy. She had read them on her lunch break, standing with her Tupperware by the newsroom-sized screen on the 24th floor, trying not to feel anything. She had felt too much. "Could I ask your name?" the nanny said. "Mara?" Mara said, "And Judith." She glanced at the elevator, like it still contained the boy. He's better with people who don't talk to him like he's a prophecy." Mara's mouth quirked. "I'm from the Midwest. We talk to everybody like they're a casserole." Judith stared at her, then laughed, a quick, bright thing she seemed surprised she still possessed. "He likes humor. The elevator chimed. Judith's spine straightened like a string had been tugged. "I'll good night." Mara watched the lobby inhale and exhale without the boy. She marked the time, not meaning to, like she had once marked contraction intervals. No, stop. She finished her shift and rode the night bus home, body humming with the day like a tuning fork. The bus smelled like raincoats and possibility, and the leftover perfume of somebody braver. She curled her hand around the pole and stared at the window's black mirror. "What are you doing? You live alone. You don't invite the ache in." But the image kept playing. A shoe squeak, a moth wing inch, that birthmark, a violet star. And his words, "Don't tell him." Tell him what? That his foot remembered the way to go. That music reached in and flipped a switch that doctors and machines and cutting-edge philanthropy had not found. That you, Mara, with your broken back stories and your mop, had accidentally trespassed on a miracle. She slept like a woman on an edge, dreaming of glass doors that kept closing before you could get your hand through. The next night, coming on shift, the building felt like it was holding its tongue. The security guard, Eddie, nodded and swiped her badge with the courtly gravity of a doorman in an old movie. "Late meeting," he said, gesturing upwards. "Tokyo?" she said before her caution could build a dam. Eddie's eyebrows took a walk toward his hairline. "Lucky guess," she said. He chuckled. "Always Tokyo. And Singapore. And Mars. On 12, the carpet's blue threads shone like a lake at noon. Glass walls made conference rooms feel like complicated aquariums." Mara's cart squeaked as if to remind her what world she belonged to. She started with the kitchenette. Mugs arranged themselves into towers under her hands. She straightened the artisanal teas whose names sounded like designer perfumes. She wiped a smudge off the induction stovetop with a tenderness she wished she hadn't inherited. When she stepped into the hallway, a sound pricked the skin on her arms. The faint, uneven tick of a metronome. She followed it. All the conference rooms looked empty, screens in sleep mode, tables set with glass water bottles and pens that cost as much as a day's food. At the end of the corridor, a half-open door. She recognized Judith's beige heart first, then the silhouette in the chair at the window, the boy's shoulders. He had his eyes closed. A tiny plastic metronome sat on the sill next to a bowl of clementines, its pendulum nodding like a tiny gentleman. Tick, tick, tick. The rhythm stuttered and resumed, a child learning to say a hard truth. Judith looked up, started, lifted a finger to her lips. Behind her, Theo's hand bobbed minutely in time with the metronome. His foot stayed still. "Do you want me to?" she mouthed, pointing to the hallway to a way. Judith shook her head. "Wait." The room felt like it was made of sugar and might melt if you coughed. Adrian stood at the far end by the bookshelf, phone to his ear. Face turned away. His hand was on his hip in a way that told her his back hurt. Ah, not immortal then. He had removed his jacket. His shirt sleeves were rolled with surgical neatness. His cufflinks gleamed like small, guarded planets. "I understand that." He was saying, quiet but relentless. "But we're not talking about a missed shipment. We are talking about human beings, Dr. Luo. You know what my foundation's name would do to your journal if Judith gave the tiniest of headshakes. Don't listen. Be a wall." Theo opened his eyes and saw Mara, and the metronome ticked through a beat where her name might have been. She made the shape with her lips. "Hello." He lifted his chin in a micro-greeting. "Say." "No words," he whispered, his mouth as if cottoned. "Just do. The thing. The thing." Judith looked at Mara like only a particular kind of adult could. A plea, a boundary, a trust. Mara swallowed and stepped in, keeping to the edge of the room as if she were walking the rim of a sleeping pond. She started humming before fear could stop her, soft as footfalls on carpet. The same 5 up, 3 down. The metronome fell obediently into that curve, like a rivulet finding a riverbed. "Tick-hum, tick-hum!" Theo's throat moved. He raised his left hand like a conductor calling up a section of strings. The right foot, the stubborn one, quivered. His eyes were wide but not letting go of her. Adrian's voice sliced quieter. "We'll talk later." He tucked the phone away and turned, the whole clock of him reorienting. He saw the boy, the cleaner, the suspended metronome beat knitting them, and his hand went very still on the back of a chair. Theo's foot slid forward an inch, then 2, stop shudder forward, like something catching and releasing. The hand on the chair trembled. He wasn't standing, he wasn't walking, but there was a thaw. It was like watching a winter field think about melting. The moment shredded. The metronome clacked out of rhythm. Theo's face went harsh. He snatched at the wheels, anger aflare that looked like protection. "Don't!" He cut himself off, cheeks hot. He curled into stillness. "It doesn't." He rubbed the heel of his hand against his left thigh, as if he could scrub the tingle out. "It's fake." "It's not fake," Adrian said without thinking. And Judith shot him a look that could have stopped a flood. He pressed his lips together, that clip of control back. "I'm sorry," he said to no one and everyone. "I need a minute." He left, quiet and fast, as if the room had lost air. The door whispered shut behind him. Theo exhaled hard, a small storm passing. He looked at Mara's uniform, at the pale bleach freckles on her sleeves, at the scuff on her shoe she kept forgetting to polish out. "You don't look like a miracle worker," he said, voice flat with 12-year-old brutality. "I'm not," she said. "I'm a mop worker." A corner of his mouth tilted. He stared at the metronome. Tick, tick, tick. Humming is cheating. "Okay," she said. "We can do other things." Her mind opened its drawers with a rattled calm. "We can do stupid cleaning games." "Sick," he said. She walked to the whiteboard and drew a hopscotch of numbered blocks with the squeal of a marker. "This is called Sponge City," she said solemnly. "You can only roll the wheels over the numbers that rhyme with orange." He blinked. "Nothing." "Exactly." She kept her voice professional, ridiculous. "So we have to figure out different rules. Like, only roll over prime numbers, or only touch the squares that are even with your right wheel and odd with your left." "That's not how even and odd work," he said, but his mouth had the shy curl of someone stepping onto a dance floor in the dark. "I'm not a mathematician," she said. "I'm a Sponge City planner." She placed 2 folded towels on the floor like gates. "You steer through. We can beat the metronome if we have to. We own the rhythm." He narrowed his eyes at the towels, considering the geometry of them like a general studying a wartime map. Judith exhaled a breath that sounded like a prayer with the vowels scraped off. He rolled forward, tentative, then more sure. His knees quivered. The right leg had the electric stillness of something that had forgotten the grammar of moving. He aimed for the left towel. The right wheel kissed it and slid as if honoring a treaty. He swallowed, breath shallow and hot. He did the same to the other towel. The metronome kept ruling the room in quiet ticks. "We're not going to do any big stuff," she said. "Just getting bored together." "You're weird," he said. "I get that for free." The door opened without a knock, and the conference room smelled suddenly like a colder wind. A man in a pinstripe suit whose price could have supported a family for a winter stepped in, forgetting he had a body. He was smiling a smile designed for victories. Then he saw the towels and stopped. "Am I interrupting?" "Yes," Judith said, in the tarpaulin tones of someone who wasn't paid to tell billionaires no, and did it anyway when necessary. "I need Adrian," the man said, smile switching angles. Law called again. "There's a window for the paper to happen our way." Judith didn't move. "Please," the man said. And that softener was real, not a lubricant. "It matters." Adrian had moved like a ghost to the doorway, drawn by his name. He took in pinstripe towels, metronome, boy, Mara. "I'll be right back," he said to Theo. "To Mara," he added with that clipped gratitude. "Thank you for whatever this is, sponges," she said, because what was dignity for if not to share? When they went, Judith's shoulders sank half an inch. "I should have asked permission," she said to Mara, which in nanny language meant I should have protected you from the crossfire of a family with too much power. "We didn't do anything," Mara said, and a quiet hot chord at the base of her skull thrummed. "Lies are sticky," her grandmother had said, and they bind the tongue as well as the ear. Theo's breath made steam on the window. "I know a song," he said to the glass, and Mara's heart startled like a bird. "It's dumb. I hate it." "What's it called?" Mara asked, keeping her voice a room you could exit easily. "It doesn't have a name," he said. "It's just she used to." He blinked fast. The room had the clock had and the light was like, ting, ting, and I could taste metal. "And he swallowed. She sang, she hummed, but I don't remember. It makes my teeth feel like sand." Judith had stopped breathing. "Do you want to?" "No," he said. His cheeks went white again. "No more talking, do the sponge city thing." They did, until the building sighed and the night left sticky fingerprints on the window. He seemed less like a storm by the end, more like air learning it could carry birds again. When she left to clean the big conference room on 26, she was skinned with fatigue and something else. Inside the long table where power did its rituals, the air smelled like lemon and calculation. She wiped fingerprints that didn't belong to her off the glass, pressed the wrinkles out of the room with hands used to smoothing what other people had crushed. In the wastebasket under the head chair, the seat that had a tiny invisible crown, she saw the corner of an envelope wedged under a wadded-up catering receipt. It had been shredded in a hurry and missed the bin. She shouldn't, she knew, but paper talked if you were poor long enough. She plucked it out like a magician's scarf. The letterhead made the back of her knees go cold. Harbor Clinic. She read the first line and then didn't see the rest for a moment because her vision had hazed. A decade-old ache unscrolled. Harbor. The place that had smelled like disinfectant and coffee, where she'd signed forms with a shaking hand and a rent due. She blinked through the blur. The letter was a settlement notice, legalese arranged like a dangerous bouquet. It referred to a non-disclosure agreement she had once sworn like a vow. It referred to embryological anomalies in a limited sample cohort. It referred to donors. It referred to a name. There was a photograph stapled to the back, badly as if by a person unused to staples. 3 babies in the neonatal ward, pink hats like flags, labels blurred by the copy. One infant had a smudge of purple just behind his left ear, the exact shape and size of a star she had just watched breathing in glass light. The room tilted. She steadied herself with a palm on the table and heard in the same instant the soft rhythm of feet in the carpeted hallway. Adrian's gait, she realized with a shock. His knee stiffer on the left than the right, his shoes making an inaudible hush that the carpet remembered anyway. She shoved the envelope into a cart's bottom shelf under the trash liner and bent over the table as if rubbing a stubborn stain. He came in and paused. "I didn't know there was anyone in here." "I'm invisible," she said before her sense could pull at her sleeve. He almost smiled, then didn't. "My son, what you did." He stopped, pinched the bridge of his nose as if a headache had written its thesis behind his eyes. He switched topics like changing trains without warning. "What did you say your name was?" She didn't recall ever saying. "Mara. Where are you from, Mara?" That drafting table voice, that carefulness that had built towers. "Here now," she said. "I grew up far away. But you wouldn't know the town." One dark eyebrow softened. "If there's one thing I've learned, it's that all towns are the same where it counts." He moved as if to leave, then stopped. His throat worked. He was asking permission to finish the question. Please don't fill him with hope. The way he said hope turned the word old and fractious, like a piece of machinery that had rusted in place. She stepped back from the table, rag in her hand. "Okay," she said, "but..." He came filled already. He closed his eyes. Everybody says that until it rains. He was about to exit when his gaze snagged on her cart on the tiniest edge of white that disobeyed the trash liner's attempt at concealment. Harbour. It was like watching a man taste a poison and pretend it was wine. "What's that?" he asked. She didn't move. "Trash," she said, "from the meeting." He didn't touch it. He looked at it as a master diver might look at a sudden rip in calm water. "I'll have legal handle disposal," he said too lightly. "Biohazard, in a sense. I'll take care of it," she said. Their eyes met. She had the bizarre sensation of standing on opposite cliffs of the same continent. He nodded and left. When the door shut, she pulled the envelope out with hands that were not steady. In the reflection on the black glass of the powered-down screen, her face looked like a woman who'd left a house in a hurry without her shoes. She slid the photograph free. Behind the baby's ear, Violet Star. Her own first mother had called such marks angels' fingerprints. At Harbour, the nurses had called them vascular birthmarks. She had called it a thing you kissed because you were allowed one small kindness in a machine. Her throat clicked. She slid the photo back into the liner. "Don't be stupid. Don't think this through. You can't." But her hands had already chosen. Treasonous, hungry. She tucked the photo into the thin inner pocket of her uniform where she kept her grandmother's button. The glossy paper lay over her heart with a coldness that felt like a zero on a form you didn't mean to sign. She stood like that a long time with a mop against her shoulder, as if it could hold her up, the metronome in the other room ticking away any future where she could pretend she had not seen that star. The glossy paper lay over her heart with a coldness that felt like a zero on a form you didn't mean to sign. Mara pressed her palm to the pocket. Silly, as if hiding could be accomplished with skin. She finished the floor in a trance that still knew how to cut neat edges with a wet mop. Her body did jobs while her mind fell down wells. On the bus home, she sat in the back and watched the city's late windows, rectangles of other people's lives. A woman at a sink, a man in a throw blanket, a teenager pinwheeling in his chair to music only he could hear. She had been other people's windows once. She had been a body in a clinic and a signature on a page. She had wanted so badly to be good and solvent and done. The letter had used phrases that sounded like jokes if you said them in a bar. Embryological anomalies, limited cohort, donor confidentiality, settlement. Harbour had a logo shaped like a safe little wave. She had loved the wave once. It had looked like bomb. She had walked into that building because her rent was overdue, and her grandmother's pills cost more monies than Mercy had printed that month. Stop. She made tea with hands that shook. She took the photo out and laid it on her kitchen table, the laminate scarred by other. Tenants cut bread and arguments. She stared at the smudge behind the baby's ear until it filled the room, and there was nothing else. Not the cheap clock, not the chair missing a screw, not the tile lifting in the corner like a dog's ear. She had to be wrong. There were other ears, other stars. Her hand picked up her phone. Don't. She put it down, picked it up, searched home DNA kit. She had a box under her sink with things she meant to throw away. Expired toothpaste, a bent whisk, a knit cap from a gas station. She had a habit of keeping things people would tell her to discard. She recognized the feeling now, the same tug she'd obeyed then. If you get rid of this, you get rid of what happened. She had lived too long to believe in that mercy. She ordered the kit. When it arrived 3 days later, she stared at it like a riddle. This was a movie thing, not a life thing. But here it was. She took her own swab with the weird intimacy of someone stealing a piece of herself. For Theo's, she did something that made her stomach go tight. She saved the paper cup he'd drunk from in the conference room after their Sponge City session. She sealed both samples, heart leaping at every sound in the hallway, as if the building could hear double betrayals through drywall. While the week crawled, she kept cleaning, kept humming around the corners of rooms, kept making up games for a boy who was equal parts grace and glare. He let her tape grey lines on the carpet that he steered his wheels over like a subway conductor. He let her balance lemon slices on the rims of glasses, so he'd have to angle the chair just so. He let her fail with him without telling her she was failing. And that was perhaps the kindest thing anyone had done for her in a decade. He also pushed her away like a little king, and she let him do it. "This is dumb," he told her when the mop was the baton, and the rhythm went sideways. "Completely dumb," she agreed. "Why do I feel like ants are crawling in my calf?" "Because your brain is sending weird emails to your legs," she said. "Your spam filter is broken. Can you unbreak it?" "Nope. We can just keep sending little messages until the spam blocker gets bored and lets one through," he snorted. "You're not a doctor." "Nope. Are you scared of my dad?" "Yep." He gave her a sly moon of a smile. Good. She tasted something like smoke under the sweetness of being useful. Hope is a complicated sugar. She didn't see Adrian much for 4 days. When she did, he was always moving. Late, early, both. The whole city moved around his timing, like birds around a tall man walking fast. He walked like someone whose muscles remembered sports and boardrooms and hospital corridors. Once, she saw him pause outside the glass and watch Theo navigate the towel gates. His face went gentle in a way that made her have to look down at her own hands. On the 5th day, the test result came to her phone as she was scraping chewing gum off a carpet with the stubborn tenderness of a mother removing burrs from a child's coat. The subject line was as naive as a child's drawing. "Your results are ready." Her body turned into a bell. In the supply closet, between a box of contractor bags and a pyramid of toilet paper that could have outlived an apocalypse, she opened the email. She entered the password. She held the world by the throat for 1 second, and then the page loaded. Probability of relatedness, 99.99%. Deu, the were, show so, learn so. In 7 disabilities. Relationship likelihood, biological mother-child. She sat down on the industrial mat like someone who'd been delivered a blow to the sternum. The fluorescent closet light hummed. The paper towels stared at her like a lot of little white eyes. She put the phone face down on the floor because the screen felt hot. Mara made herself breathe in a slow, square pattern like the therapist at the free clinic had taught her years ago. The therapist had had kind hands and a face like a dandelion someone had breathed on. Mara had told her the story and then laughed while crying, because the laugh came loaded with rage and the cry came loaded with relief. "You're allowed to name it," the therapist had said gently. "You were poor and someone made that profitable." She named this now, in the closet between plastic lids and lemon-scented floor cleaner, Sun. The word didn't fit in her mouth like it had been made for it. It fit like a wild seed that could crack concrete. She put her face in her hands and shook in a noiseless way. Then she sat up straight and did what her grandmother had taught her and what her life had hammered into her. She made a list of what could be done in the next 10 minutes that wouldn't blow anything up. Don't tell him. Not yet. He had a body that fought wars. You didn't put another war in a child's bloodstream mid-battle. Don't tell his father, not in a hallway. Boring saved lives. She stood, put the phone in her pocket, and went to Sponge City like she kept a city running. Theo was in a sulky weather system. "I'm tired," he said, which meant I am scared and angry and everything is too bright. "Okay, we can be tired and move one lemon slice." "Two," he negotiated, the corners of his mouth betraying him again. They did 3. He rubbed his left thigh with the heel of his hand, grimacing. "It's like bees. Bees are good," she said. He rolled his eyes. "Not in your leg, fair, but it means something's happening." He scowled at the whiteboard where she'd drawn a city grid. "Do you think I'm broken?" "No," she said. So fast and flat it felt like throwing her body between him and a moving truck. "What if I never walk?" His eyes were black wells then. "Not theatrical, not fishing, just the truth." "Then you don't," she said, "because lying is a form of cruelty. Then we do chairs like skateboards and new wheel circles around people who can't keep up. And also, maybe walking looks different than television, people say. Maybe it's 3, 6, 13 steps, weird and ugly in yours." He looked at her like she'd said there was a secret backstage to the world. "Weird and ugly in mine," he repeated, tentative, and her eyes stung in an ungodly instant because she had once whispered that exact sentence into a towel in a bathroom, with a fan that could not drown out the sound of her own mouth. On the 7th day, Adrian asked to speak to her. He did it with that deceptive gentleness that rich people get good at. A knock on the open door of the janitor's closet, his big hands visible, his gaze not crushing, the words stacked carefully. "Mara," he said, "do you have a minute?" Every atom of her was a violin note. "Sure." They walked to a small glass room that seemed to be for thinking. He closed the door and folded himself into a chair with the care of someone who could not let himself be caught slumping. "I'm paying 6 specialists to do what you did for the price of whatever they pay you," he said after a bare breath, faint humor that had found a crack. He rubbed his eyes. "I'm angry about everything, which is not news." "You should be angry," she said, because she didn't know where else to stand. "Dr. Luo thinks there's a functional overlay to Theo's condition." He shifted, watching her for the word's impact. "Mind, body, motor circuits." Offline, he touched his temple as if this were an elevator panel he could press. "Trauma. That's the short story." "Trauma," she repeated, tasting it for him, from... He looked at the floor for a beat, then up. 2 years ago," he said. "You probably read the articles, or maybe you didn't." He winced. The newspaper cut him too. The car accident, fire, his mother. He swallowed like the word was a stone. He doesn't remember most of it. He remembers sound, the crack, the smell. His knuckles went white. The metal Mara's spine pulled cold. She thought of Theo describing taste. He said, "Metal and light and a clock, and humming." Adrian's eyes flickered. "Humming?" He said. "Someone hummed once." She said, "Blood roaring, and it hurts his teeth to think about it." Adrian's voice was a thread. In the emergency room, a nurse hummed to him while they cut his clothes off. He told me later he hated the sound and wanted it back. He ran his hand down his face. "He hasn't wanted music since." Mara swallowed. Something fell into place. A puzzle piece with a braided edge. She saw a white room and a metronome and a wave-shaped logo. Harbour had played music for eggs in petri dishes and called it science. Harbour had played God and called it work. Harbour had sent her money with a memo line that said thank you and meant sorry and never speak of this. "I need to ask you something," Adrian said quietly, leaning in. "When you look at my son, do you see him? I mean, do you see him or do you see your own? I don't know. Hope." He grimaced at his clumsiness. "Because I can't tell anymore." She met his gaze, and against her will, she fell into a strange, deep mercy. His face stripped of its stadium lights, just a man with a bruise in the middle of him. "I see him," she said, and the truth was a clean drink. They were quiet. The glass hummed with air conditioning and capitalism. She was out of words, and then she wasn't. "Mr. Vale," she said, and the name felt like putting your hand on a hot doorknob. Did you ever work with Harbour Clinic?" He went so still, she thought for a moment, that stillness itself had weight. "Why," he said mildly, too mildly, "would you ask me that?" "No reason," she said. And in that second she saw all the versions of her life vault like horses. The one where she kept her mouth shut, the one where she screamed, the one where she walked away from the job and never came back. She picked the one where she told the next true thing. "I saw a letter. In the trash." He didn't blink, then blinked. He breathed out through his nose. "That was careless," he said in a voice that had turned to frost. On someone's part, she held his stare. "Let it cut." "Was it careless to work with them?" she said softly. "Or to throw away proof you did?" Something broke in his face. Not the hard thing, the soft one. He leaned back like he had been pushed. "Harbor delivered my son," he said. And the verbs were a battlefield. They saved. They got us in. They broke other things. I settled. I settled because all I do is settle. Deals, arguments, disasters, his mouth twisted. The letter was a new issue. A paper, a retraction. They want my signature to make something go away. They know a thing about donor procedural errors that will not help anyone to read at breakfast. Her voice had to step softly over its own shaking. What if the donor wanted it read at breakfast? He stared at her as if she'd reached into his chest and put her hand on an organ without washing her hands first. He looked pained, furious, calculating, hopeful. "Did you?" He strangled the question before it turned into a sound. She said the worst thing to say right then because it was the only thing that would keep them alive. "I'm just the cleaner." He breathed out a laugh that wasn't one. He stood. "Please keep doing whatever you're doing," he said, and the formality was a wall slammed down between them, within reason. He left her with a taste of lemon and dread. That night she dreamed of a room where a metronome's tick was the only safe sound in the world. A woman hummed into the back of her own hand so no one would hear. On the wall, a wave logo undulated smugly. The babies were 3 pink planets. Someone wrote on a form, switched 2 stickers, said, "Oh." Someone else said, "It's fine." It wasn't fine. The next afternoon, Theo refused everything. "I won't be your project," he said, tearing the tape lines with a defiant shove of his wheel. "I won't." "You're not," she said, even as the word project hissed down her spine. "You're the mayor of Sponge City. The rest of us are trash collectors." "I'm trash," he said, daring her. No, the word shocked them both with its force. He looked at her as if she had slapped him and then hugged him in the space of one breath. He rubbed his thigh. "It burns." She looked at his leg, at the tiny muscles arguing in there. "May I?" She lifted her hands. He nodded gruff, trying not to be tender and failing, which made him win. She put her fingertips on the top of his sock and hummed the dumb 5 up, 3 down. Only in her head, not out loud. He flinched, then didn't. The skin under her fingers quivered. "Tell me if..." "Don't talk," he said. But the words were not a slap now. They were a request with a bruise under it. She nodded. He cried noiselessly with his mouth set, as his toes remembered how gravity worked. When she left, her phone buzzed in her pocket with a message from a number not in her contacts. The words made her heart step wrong. "Ha! We see movement on your account. Please confirm your address for updated correspondence." She sat on a bench in the atrium, in the average hush of very expensive evenings, and stared at the screen. 2 letters like a snake. She typed back, "Wrong number." After a moment, "Our records show a prior donor file. Please confirm." Her palms went damp. The bench felt like an ocean rock. Somebody had noticed that she'd moved a piece on the board. This would not be an easy game to play like a child. She stood and stretched slowly. Eddie nodded at her from the desk, old movie courteous. The fountain kept making that private sound of wealth. She walked back to the conference room to collect a forgotten rag, and saw, on the whiteboard where Theo had drawn a maze for her to navigate with the cart, a new drawing on the corner he hadn't pointed out. A family, 3 heads, tick bodies, one in a chair with bright wheels like suns. The smallest head had a purple dot behind its left ear. Above them, a weird, 6-pointed star hung that looked too much like her grandmother's brooch. She stood with her hand on the doorframe like someone about to go into labor 12 years too late. She didn't hear Adrian until he was beside her. His tie loosened, his eyes red-rimmed with rage at something that had not been her. He followed her gaze to the drawing and made a sound that wasn't language. "It's just a doodle," she said. "Nothing is just anything anymore," he replied. She turned to him. Every reckless molecule she earned voting yes. "I did a test," she blurted. I couldn't not." She took out her phone and showed him the screen with the only proof that had ever made sense to people like him. "It says," he put his hand out, palm inward, "stay." His pupils widened and his jaw trembled once, a crack in marble. "Don't," he said softly, not to her, to the universe. It didn't matter. Not yet, but she had already said the worst word and the best. "Mother," she whispered, as if saying it gently would keep it from exploding. "It says I'm..." Theo rolled around the corner, hair mussed, cheeks still wet from effort or tears or both. What, he said, because small kings could smell when a room had just been rearranged around them. What does it say? Mara and Adrian both turned to him like planets turning to their sun in a panic. "It says," Adrian said, voice so even it made her want to scream, "that we should all go home. I live here," Theo said. "Then it says," Mara said, "because the lie would kill them, that tomorrow we build a longer sponge city." He studied their faces. It wasn't enough. "Tell me what it says," he demanded. Chin up, the star behind his ear hiding in plain sight. Mara opened her mouth. The fire alarm went off, clanging, the building's steel heart yelling. Theo went white and very small. The sound clattered the air. Somewhere someone yelled, "It's on 21." Judith appeared, grabbed the chair handles with practiced speed. "We have to go," she said, and the alarm became a red pulse. Theo's hand shot out and grabbed Mara's sleeve so hard it hurt. "Don't leave," he said, the words drenched. "I won't," she said, and the clamor said, "Liar, because everything leaves." And she tightened her fingers on the chair and ran at Judith's side, and the smoke smell came like a memory with teeth, and they were moving toward stairs Theo hated, toward a thing that had already burned them all once. And she looked down, just once, because habits kill and save. At the boy's right foot it lifted. The world narrowed to the square of carpet in front of his wheel, and the hard bell of the alarm. Mara felt the grip of his fingers on her sleeve, saw Judith's jaw clench, saw Adrian on the other side of the chair like a soldier guarding an emperor no one could agree to fight for. Smoke stung, neither much nor little, just enough to pry open the old door in Theo's mind where flames had once lived. "Stairs," Judith said tightly. "We have to decide now." Service ramp, Adrian snapped, and they pivoted as one creature with 4 heads toward the loading bay corridor, where the building ate deliveries and spat out garbage. Ted, a security guard with a mullet you'd never stop loving him for, flung the door wide. "Go, small electrical in a closet." "Contained, but the alarms." "Don't say fire," Theo hissed, the word cutting his mouth. "Okay," Ted said, instantly obedient. "The building is being too loud. We're going to make it shut up." They barreled down the long grey hall. It felt like racing through the throat of some gentle mechanical wail. The floor tremored with the alarm's heartbeat. At the end, a ramp spilled into the cool kiss of the loading dock night. Rain had started. The smell of petrichor cleaved the panic like a knife. Mara knew, because terror had its own math, that they needed a different rhythm. She began clapping. Not a song, just a steady beat the alarm couldn't steal. Clap, 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 clap. "Step, roll," she murmured, because even one syllable too many could tip him over. "Step, roll." Theo clenched his jaw so hard she worried his teeth would crack. He lifted his right foot again, not heroic, not filmic, just a stubborn, unglamorous inch, his knee shaking like a fledgling bird, then rolled the wheel, as if yoking the two things together would make them obey. "Step, roll," he croaked, hatred and hope racing in his blood. "Aita boy," Judith breathed, her voice strange and fierce. "Don't," Theo said, not to her but to old ghosts. "Don't you dare take this from me." They reached the dock. Rain stitched them to the air. The alarm was dumber out here, the city louder, the sky a soft bruise. In the pool of sodium light, the boy went slack, breath like knives, eyes doing that tiny, terrified scanning that had saved him once and now didn't know how to stop. "It's over," Adrian said. Careless, desperate, because his own brain needed it to be narrative. It was nothing accidental. "You're safe." "Don't say safe," Theo said, a growl so small it broke her instead of the night. Adrian flinched. He looked like a man who'd thrown himself at a locked door for 2 years and come away with his bones bruised and his mouth bloody and the door still locked. He swore under his breath. British, startled out of him, not learned, and that made Mara almost smile, which made her want to cry harder. The alarm hiccuped, then shut off, the building's heart deciding it had cried enough for public. Silence fell so hard it rang. They were all shaking in their different ways. Ted leaned against the dock wall and patted his chest, laughing with those "oh hell I'm alive" giggles that make you feel fondly towards strangers. Theo's fingers loosened on Mara's sleeve, but he didn't let go. He looked at her with the exhausted contempt of a marathon runner facing stairs. "I hate you," he said. "I hate me too," she said. And the truth steadied both of them. "You were going to say something," he said, sitting up straighter in the cooling air. Before. Mara looked at Adrian, then at the puddle, catching a light glare like a coin, at the bottom of a wishing well. She took a long breath and felt it build a room in her chest. "I was going to say," she started, and even the gulls that nested in the building's eaves hushed, "that there are things grown-ups hide because they think they're protecting kids. And sometimes they are. And sometimes they're protecting themselves." Adrian's head dropped. Once, a heavy nod, not of agreement, but of guilty recognition. "I was going to say," she continued, and her voice did not shake because the worst shaking had already been done, "that your walking might be about your legs remembering how to be part of you, and your heart remembering how to be part of your legs. And sometimes the thing that unlocks that is stupid and simple, like clapping, or humming, or telling the truth when everyone is duct-taping their mouths." Theo's eyes were black and bright at once. What truth? Mara's mouth opened and closed. She had promised herself not to split him open in the street, soaked in rain, adrenaline still ricocheting in his bones. She had also promised herself to stop living as if there were always someone who knew better than her about her own heart. Adrian saved her and worsened everything by stepping forward, his voice level but soft with rip current. "I owe you a truth," he said to his son. 2 years ago, the night of the accident, I dragged you out of the car. I wasn't brave, I was just your father, but I did. There was a sound that, never mind. Your legs worked, you ran and then you fell and then afterwards you wouldn't stand, you couldn't. The doctors, they told us things that were true, but not all the truth. Part of it is inside you, trying to keep you from even the idea of fire. You turned your legs off to save the rest of you. That was smart," he swallowed. "But you don't need it to be that smart anymore." Theo breathed like a hooked fish. "You told me I broke my legs," he said, betrayed child's small voice. But he already knew he'd been given a fairer story than the ones on the hospital cartoon. "I told you what they told me, because I didn't know how to say the bigger thing without being a monster," Adrian whispered. And that was the first honest, selfish sentence he let himself have in front of the boy. I am scared all the time. I thought if you believed it was your bones, you wouldn't blame me." Theo looked at him in the way kids look at parents once, and then never again the same way. He turned to Mara. "What were you going to say?" Mara met Adrian's eyes and felt the world tilt toward choices she'd never trained for. "I was going to say that when you were born," she faltered, "tasted bile, tasted a hospital's plastic air, that there were people in the room who didn't tell the truth about how you came to be in the world, and that I was one of the people whose body made you possible." Theo's face went slack. He blinked 3 times slow. Judith made a small shape of sound, not in any alphabet. Adrian closed his eyes, braced, then opened them, because he had a policy of looking at the car before it hit him. "I don't understand," Theo said flat. "You mean like you were the nurse?" No, she said. I mean, I am the person whose egg, whose DNA, who contributed the half that makes your cells you. He stared at her blankly, then flared. That's not Mom He couldn't find a tense to fit. You're lying. It was supposed to be anonymous, she said. It was supposed to be clean. It wasn't. It got messy. And then they made it quiet. Adrian stepped in, his face careful like a surgeon's hand. We worked with Harbour, he said, each syllable costing him. It was legal. Barely, we were desperate. He swayed as if admitting desperation cost balance. We didn't know. We knew later. We settled. His voice broke like a line snapped under too much fish. I thought protecting you meant burying the past. I don't know anything. Theo shuddered as if a string had been plucked too hard inside him. So she's my egg person, and you're my dad, and Mom is just dead. His breath hitched. I hate all of you. That's allowed, Judith said. A white flag fluttering in a hurricane. Rain thickened. A siren 2 streets over made a red thread through the night. Ted offered an umbrella, and then pretended to need to check a lock, because the human heart sometimes wants privacy more than dryness. Mara crouched so they were eye level. I am not coming for anything, she said, the words tasting like blood and trust. Not your name, not your house, not your life. I wanted to tell you because you were making a map, and someone had hidden a river on it. People who love you did that. People who loved me did that to me once. I promised myself I wouldn't do it to anyone again. Theo looked at her and at his father and at the city, as if trying to find a line of horizon that belonged to him. I can't breathe, he said. And then, as if it were the most normal thing in the world to manage a heartbreak and a neuromuscular reboot in the same hour, he put his palms flat on the armrests, lifted his right foot, planted it, and with a strangled sob, took a tiny, hideous, perfect step toward her. Judith cried a raw, brief cry like a mother animal. Adrian made a sound like a man who had been holding a building up with his back and had been allowed to put it down for 1 second. Mara's hands were out but did not touch. Theo stood, knees locked, face wet with rain and salt, and then his body said too much and he fell into the chair like a canoe tipping back from an almost upend. Behind them the building sighed like a giant putting its face in water. The alarm was done sulking. Ted gave a thumbs up. All clear, he called, voice light and tender. Let's go inside, Judith murmured, and the way she said it made inside sound like a country where your passport still worked. They wheeled back through the ramp. The elevator hummed them upward like a lullaby with a motor. In the glass car, that familiar cube where so many lies had faced themselves, Theo stared at the floor and then at their feet and then at Mara's hands. If you're you, he said, halting, what does that make me? Mine, she said, and then added fiercely, because the fear that had kept her zipped for years bared its teeth. And his and yours. He nodded once, the way he had the first night, his lashes stuck together. I want to sleep for 2 years. Take the weekend, Adrian said, and in any other year that would have been a joke. They exited into silence full of witnesses. Glass carpet, the whiteboard with yesterday's maze. On the corner, the little drawing with the purple dot looked back like a dare. Adrian stood in front of it, then did something that made Mara have to hold on to the back of a chair. He took the dry erase marker and added another figure, taller, with long hair tied back. He drew it standing between the tall one and the small one in the chair, like a conductor holding 2 choirs apart so they could learn their own parts before singing together. No one made a sound. Judy put her hand on her mouth and shook her head like someone had told a joke that hit bone. We have to talk about Harbour, Mara said into that sacred quiet, because the way out was sometimes through the hardest door. They messaged me. They know I know. They want to keep it clean. Nothing is clean, Adrian said with a tired, dangerous calm. I'll call my lawyer. He looked at Theo. Not to destroy, to tell the truth. If we tell it first, it's ours. Theo rubbed at his leg again, thoughtful, a little boy's gesture grafted onto a soldier. If we tell it, he said carefully, do I have to be on TV? Not unless you want to be, Adrian said. I don't. Then you won't. Theo nodded once like a CEO ending a meeting. He was pale, older, 12 again. Do the Sponge City thing, he said to Mara. I want to. I want to move without talking. She made the tape grid, careful as prayer. He ran the wheels slow, then faster, then stopped. He lifted the right foot in a small rebellion against gravity. Set it down with the satisfaction of doing something stupidly hard and exactly right. Mara's phone buzzed on the table with the insistence of a hornet. She glanced. A new message. This one not from Harbour. This one with a law firm's name at the top and a subject line that made her stomach drop and the hairs on her arms stand up. Supina, Vale Foundation v. Harbour Clinic. Adrian didn't move toward the phone, but his eyes did. They're fast, he said, almost admiring the speed of the weapon that could shoot his own foot. He picked it up, read, breathed. Good, we're faster. Will they take me away, Theo asked, as if the law could send men in suits to disassemble families they didn't understand. No, both adults said at once, and the chorus made the room warmer. They worked until the building yawned, and the night turned its coat inside out to reveal morning. When she left that dawn, Mara saw her reflection in the lobby glass and did not look away. The woman in the window was not a cleaner or a miracle worker or a liar or a saint. She was a person whose body had built another person's body and then been told to go away. She was back. As she pushed the cart into the service elevator, a voice behind her said, uncertain and tender, Mara. She turned. Adrian stood with his tie not yet on and his shirt open at the throat, hair in the just-woke mess that made him look more expensive somehow. I don't know how to do any of this, he said. It was not a confession he could afford to make often. But I want to do the brave version, she nodded. Not trusting herself to speak, because if she did, she might say you don't get to want brave now. You have to be it. But perhaps wanting was the first brick. Will you stay, he asked, not meaning the building. Yes, she said, meaning the boy. He nodded. Read that correctly and inclined his head. A kind of bow. Then let's be very inconvenient to people who prefer convenience. Finally, she said, because rage when married to tenderness becomes comedy. Something I'm good at. They both almost smiled. Then the day picked up its satchel of work and threw it at them. It began with lawyers and ended with lace. In between, there were headlines like open mouths, rooms filled with microphones, and the quiet insistence of a boy's foot learning to speak to him again. There were court filings that read like literature, written by ghosts and press conferences where Adrian learned to say, without choking, the words I'm sorry and I knew and I have decided to stop hiding. There was Harbour, of course, with its wave logo unchanged, a stubborn smile in blue. They came elegant and certain, then cautious and mean, then finally tired. They sent men with voices like polished stones to say that anomalies were part of Pioneer's valiant cost. They sent women with soft hands to look at Mara as if they remembered her, which made her skin want to leave her bones. They filed papers that said consent and meant silence. Adrian's counsel answered with words that meant light. A judge with eyes like a winter ocean read every adjective as if it had been criminally misused. Mara did not become a symbol because she refused to be distilled. But she did become an inconvenience. On a rainy Tuesday, she sat in a witness chair and told the truth about a room that hummed with machines and the sound of a nurse chewing gum and the way the paperwork had been slid to her, stapled at a crooked angle. The way she had signed because the rent had been an animal in her kitchen that day and no other predator had been willing to fight it for her. She did not weep. She did not scorch. She made a map and named the rivers. Theo watched a live stream from a different room with Judith and a therapy dog named Kiwi, who smelled like corn chips and love. He saw the way Mara's hands held the paper cup of water, fingers white at the first knuckle, and he recognized his own hands there like a photograph he had never seen. Adrian testified too. He did not dress his grief in metaphors. He said, I was complicit, and the room did a small, discreet intake of breath. He said, we wanted a child. and our wanting made us bad listeners. We stopped asking questions that would have made us face the cost of our joy. He said, "I paid people to fix things with silence. I regret that. I am fixing it with noise." He sat down. He did not look at Mara, because looking at her right then would have unstrung him, and he needed all his strings for the next hour. Between hearings and depositions, the building hummed its ordinary song. Sponge City got bigger, then smaller, then turned into a game without a name because the best things refused to be branded. Theo stood for 2 seconds, then 4, then one astonishing Tuesday, very early in the morning, when only the potted ficus and a sleepy janitor in a different building could have believed you. He took 3 steps that were more like conversational hesitations than strides, then fell into the chair and laughed like someone had opened a window in his chest. Mara laughed with him and put her head on his arm for a second, and then pulled it away, because lines mattered even if love begged them to blur. "Weird and ugly and yours," she said, shaking, and he said yes, and it was like watching somebody put a flag on a planet that already belonged to them and to no empire. Adrian walked in on the end of it, and did the thing he did now when the world overwhelmed him. He leaned his head very gently against the glass wall, and closed his eyes for half a second, and let himself count to 5. His therapist's new trick, and then straightened and came toward them like a father. "Not a storm. Good," he said, voice like a floorboard that had learned not to creak. "Good, good, good. They're nothing like movie steps," Theo said with immense satisfaction. "Movies are cowards," Adrian said, and the accuracy of that pleased his son. They decided together that there would be no gala, no staged moment of walking in a tuxedo on a staircase in slow motion. There would be walking only if walking happened the way rain happened, at its own pace, on its own schedule, indifferent to cameras. But life had ways of making irony taste like a pastry. 3 months later, after a blistering spring of court and truth-telling, and nights where exhaustion felt like a sinkhole, and mornings where the city smelled like a new shirt, the Vale Foundation announced a different kind of event. Not a fundraiser, a reckoning, an evening where harbor families could meet one another, where lawyers would say sorry in public without a non-disclosure slide to crouch behind, where the new grant would be announced. The Harborlight Project, free trauma-informed rehabilitation for kids with functional movement disorders, run by people who knew how to be boring and brave at the same time. Directed by Mara, no last name on the program at her request. She would choose when, and if the world got to know the one she'd shed and the one she might take. The hall smelled like peonies and nervousness. The stage had been dressed by a person with taste, and a person with a conscience. There were no spotlights. There were chairs arranged in circles rather than rows. On the wall, where there would have been a logo, there was a drawing, 5 stick figures, some tall, some short, a chair with wheels drawn like suns, a purple dot behind one ear. Above them, a 6-pointed star that looked like no countries but belonged to them. Theo came in wearing a suit that made him feel like a magician, and for once it was all right to feel like a magician. His right foot trembled. His left was steady. He wheeled himself to the edge of the stage where the ramp waited. He closed his eyes and heard not a metronome, but clapping. He opened them and saw Mara at the break, not touching it, just there. He saw his father in the front circle, tie loose already, eyes alive, hands white at the edge of his chair but relaxed by force of will. Because he had learned that the example you set is not how you hold your breath, but how you release it. "Do it ugly," Mara murmured, mouth barely moving, and he grinned with a 12-year-old's vicious joy. He stood. The room didn't gasp. Someone had written on the program in a nice serif, "Please do not gasp. Let the boy have his sound." He took 1 step, 2, stopped. The 3rd one was truly stupid-looking, and felt like lifting a damp mattress with a fork. He did it anyway. He dangled for a second like a ladder's last rung. Then the sound came. Not applause, yet, but the deep inside of bodies sigh that mammals make when a thing that has been held too long is put down. His father's hand covered his mouth. Mara's eyes filled and then steadied, as if tears would make the ground slippery. He said, "Someone clapped once, politely. Someone else hissed no and then laughed. And then, because rules were for breaking, the room applauded anyway, gently like rain on leaves." Theo smiled and hated them a little, and forgave them because people had to do something with their hands in the presence of miracle. "Enough," he said, and the clapping obeyed. They did not do speeches, they did stories. People stood from the circles and said small, precise things. How their child's hand first twitched on a Tuesday. How their insurance refused to cover a certain kind of therapy, and then changed its mind after a letter written by a person who had learned to use the word liability like a chisel. How one mother had taught her son to walk again by having him kick pine cones down a driveway. Because pine cones were funny and brains loved jokes. When it was Judith's turn, because of course she had a turn. She had been the quiet hinge of the door the whole time. She stood with her palms open and said, "I left nursing 5 years ago because I hummed to a boy in an emergency room and I couldn't stop hearing myself. I thought I had broken him with a melody. I took a job caring for him as penance and then stayed for love. Tonight I realized I didn't break anything. I held something together." She looked at Theo, who stared at her, as if seeing a harbor inside a person. "I'm sorry it took me this long to know that." "That was you," he whispered, and she nodded, and a private bright thread tied itself and then didn't need witnesses. At the edge of the room, a harbor executive slipped in like a pen. "Mark you're not sure you meant to make." He wore contrition like a borrowed coat. After the circles, he asked to speak. The room tensed. Adrian nodded slow, permission with a leash on it. The man said carefully, "There are things we will never be able to repair. There are also things we can do that are not cosmetic." He gestured to the wall where no logo was. "We will fund what you ask us to fund, and we will stop what you ask us to stop. I can't make that sound more noble than it is. It's just overdue." A woman in the back with a baby on her lap said, "Then sign," and someone brought a folder and the man signed. The room didn't applaud. The room breathed. Afterward there were cookies shaped like stars and wheels with icing spokes. And there were napkins. And there was a corner where kids built ramps out of foam blocks and played a game that had somehow already become tradition. Sponge City, with new rules every 5 minutes and champions crowned by laughter. Theo found Mara near the water carafes, where she was doing the very humble magic of helping a girl attach a straw to a lid. He touched her sleeve. "You look like you're about to run away," he said. "I always look like that in rooms with linen tablecloths," she said. "Don't," he said, and his voice, though quiet, had the iron he inherited from both the people who made him. "Stay, please." She stayed. She helped him over to a chair beside Adrian. They sat in a triangle that felt like a thing you could live in. "Will you?" Theo began, blushing. He swallowed, then said it fast, as if speed could push him through the fear. "Will you come to school with me, the first day, not like in the class? Just to the gate." He stared at his hands. "Because the last time I went, I was the boy everyone said sorry to. I don't want to be that boy again. I want to be the boy who has 2 people at the gate who look like trouble." Adrian choked on a laugh and coughed it back into a steady breath. "We can look like trouble," he said gravely. Mara's mouth trembled into a smile that felt like the opposite of breaking. "We're excellent at trouble," she said. "I'll bring contraband jokes." "Good," Theo said, relieved by the future he could point at. He looked at his shoes, the new ones, not because new shoes make you walk, but because sometimes ceremonial armor matters, and frowned. "Can you tie?" The sentence didn't end. He was 12, and there were witnesses and the lace had gotten long. Mara slid off her chair and knelt. "Teach me," she said. "I'm bad at laces." "You are not," he said, affronted on behalf of every loop she'd tied to hold the world together when no one was looking. "Then we can be good at them together," she said. She took his hands in hers, showed him the rabbit ears way, then the other way, then let his fingers fumble and fail and figure it out. Both of them muffling their triumph so it would belong only to them when the knot finally held. In late summer, The case closed with language that was both dull and holy. Harbour admitted process failures and ethical lapses, and more importantly, built in public what it had once hidden in private. The settlement funds seeded clinics. The apology seeded a different kind of weather. The judge's final line, unreadable to most, made Mara sit down on her couch and put her face in her hands and shake with a laughter that had been locked in her ribcage for 12 years. The court recognizes the dignity of truth-telling as a remedy distinct from damages. And the dignity, she said aloud in her silent apartment, trying the word on like a coat that finally fit. On the first day of school, the air smelled like pencils and warm asphalt and apple shampoo. They went early because early felt like a good spell to cast. Adrian carried a coffee he forgot to drink. Mara carried a bag with a snack, even though it was not that kind of school, and the snack would come back smushed and beloved. Theo wheeled, then stood at the gate because ritual is an engine, and rituals need their own gravity. A cluster of kids turned their heads the way flocks do. There was the speed look, then the longer one, then the look away and back. One kid waved with the shamelessness of childhood. Another said, "Cool chair." A third stared at the laces and said nothing, which is sometimes the kindest sentence in the world. "Do you want us to go?" Adrian asked, uncertain for once of the right angle to enter his own son's life. "Not yet," Theo said. He took 2 steps that were awkward and proud, because both could be true. He stopped and looked back at them. "You're both crying," he observed, painless as weather. "Medical condition," Adrian said, dabbing at the corner of his eye. "The diagnosis is parent." Mara snorted a wet laugh. Theo shifted his backpack to a shoulder like a man putting on an ordinary future. "I'm going in," he said, and looked at Mara, then at his father, then at the doors. He said okay to himself, not to them, and went. They watched him go until the crowd closed around him like a room that had finally made space. Adrian's hand hovered, then touched Mara's shoulder with a question mark. She nodded, not answering anything except the truth that had brought them both to this gate. The boy was theirs and his own. They walked back to the car in the soft kind of silence that only comes after courage has been spent well. On the sidewalk, under a tree already practicing a few yellow leaves for later, Adrian stopped. "Do you want breakfast?" he asked carefully, as if ordering eggs in a diner might rearrange the universe too violently. "Or, I don't know, coffee that we'll forget to drink." But in a different place, she almost said no out of habit, out of the old economy of refusing what you couldn't afford. Then she thought of the judge's sentence, and the way Theo had turned at the gate to find them, and the way truth had not ruined them, but made them real. "Yes," she said, "but we're paying separately." "Obviously," he said, grinning, the kind of grin that didn't perform. Just existed, ridiculous and human. "I'm newly poor, you're not." "I am in the currency that matters," he gestured vaguely at his chest. Humility, tiny portfolio, highly volatile. She laughed and let the morning carry them to a diner that smelled like oranges and bacon and possibility. Over toast and coffee, they drew a map on a napkin. A real one. Not the kind that tries to own land. It had 3 houses on it and paths between them. It had a clinic with a big window and a music room with no sheet music. It had an elevator that had already learned patience. It had a little star in the corner, just because. Months drifted, then flew. The Harbourlight rooms filled with ridiculous equipment. Pool noodles, bells, foam dice, old radios, cheap metronomes. The walls had hooks for canes and shelves for bricks, and not a single motivational poster. Kids came in on bad days and left with worse hair and better jokes. Parents learned to sit in chairs and not hover, and to clap in polyrhythms, and to say safe with their mouths shut. Mara's humming became an inside joke, not a sacrament. She trained other cleaners into therapists without asking them to leave their old dignity at the door. She paid them more than anyone had paid her when she had mopped the floors of rooms she could not enter. In the building where it had started, the fountain still whispered to itself. The indoor trees tried on winter and spring like hats. The glass elevator carried everybody up and down, without drama for long stretches, then hiccuped once in a while, just to remind them that systems are temperamental and miracles like an audience. On those days, a boy, growing taller, coltish, clever, would tap a rhythm on the armrest so small, only the person who needed to hear it would hear it. Tap, 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 tap. The sound was not Morse and not magic. It was the sound of a lock remembering the key. One evening, early winter, the three of them walked out into air that had the metallic smell of coming snow. The city's lights had gone soft at the edges, as if each had pulled on a sweater. They stopped at the curb while the traffic decided whose turn it was to be generous. Theo reached for both their hands without thinking. He took a step. The laces on his shoe were a little uneven, one ear bigger than the other. He did not fix them. He liked their asymmetry. It felt like truth. "What now?" he said, not fearful, curious, like a scientist who has finally decided that staying alive is the most interesting experiment in the lab. "Dinner," Adrian said, "and then we decorate a plant and call it a tree." And then Mara added, "We listen to the building be too loud and we make it shut up." With clapping, Theo rolled his eyes with practiced love. "You two are so embarrassing." "Correct," they said together. They crossed the street. Snow began, tentative, a rehearsal of lace descending in pieces. They tilted their faces up like people who had earned the right to be caught looking. Somewhere very high above them, in a glass cube that had decided to be kinder, a light flicked on and then another, an unworried constellation arranging itself into a map that only a few people would recognize. It looked, if you squinted, like a six-pointed star, awkward, homely, perfect. It looked like a promise kept. Inside the elevator, on a night not long after, Mara would stand with a mop leaning against her shoulder and watch her son, hers and not hers and entirely his, lean his hand against the glass and say, "Sing it." And she would hum, not quietly and not afraid. And his father would close his eyes and smile with all the arrogance of a man who has finally bowed to joy. And they would all feel the floor move in that gentle way that means you are going somewhere together. But for now, the snow stitched itself between streetlights, and the three of them walked on, stepping to the small, brave rhythm they had made, which went something like, step, roll, laugh, step, roll, forgive, step, roll, love.